Alright, so now that we've got the bottom end all buttoned up, we're going to move on to getting the sump cover on. So here I got the sump cover, I got all the bolts, the oil strainers, and I have a new gasket, and that's the OEM part number from Seadoo. We're going to make sure this surface is clean, we're going to make sure this surface is clean, and then we're going to get started installing some of these pieces. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put these oil strainers in place. Locations are here, here, and here. Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get the gasket on. So now that we have the oil strainers in place, we're going to put our new gasket in place. And then finally we're going to throw our cover on top, and we're going to start getting the bolts in. Now, the manual wants you to tighten this bolt and this bolt first, and then that's step A on your tightening sequence. You're going to do 44 inch-pounds, and then step B is going to be 80 inch-pounds plus or minus 9 inch-pounds. And that is your bolt pattern. And then here, if you want to look at, that's going to be your step A with these two bolts. And then that's going to be your step B with all of these bolts. I also want to note, unlike many of the other Seadoo motors, these bolts do not call for, what do you call it, Loctite. I like to get all the bolts in place first, at least somewhat threaded in, and then tighten those two first. Something else I want to note, unlike the Rotax where everything's like pre-tapped, all the threads, these motors and the Sparks like to use these, like, I don't know if you could tell, but they're like self-tapping machine screws. So the one thing I like to do is I do like to put them in by hand, and the reason I do that is because if you don't get this thing in exactly where it caught the threads in the first place, you're going to create another set of new threads. So the more you have a motor apart, the more you keep making new threads, eventually it's going to strip out. So what I like to do is I get it finger tight, and then you should be able to get a socket on here and get it to just spin in pretty easily on its own once it gets into the same thread, I guess, pattern you did in the first place. So like this one goes right in, okay? But some of these, like this one, it's in a little bit, but it's stuck. So what I do is I just keep reversing the bolt, or unthreading the bolt per se, and then eventually you get to a point where it will find those threads and it'll go back in nicely, and you won't be cutting new threads. Like there, for instance. You just gotta wiggle it around sometimes. See, I got all the bolts in. It's a little bit of a struggle. Some of them want to go right in, other ones don't. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely because of these self-tapping deals. I personally don't think that these motors are really meant to be rebuilt or last for longevity. There's a lot of self-tapping stuff in here and a lot of smaller screws, but it is what it is. All right, so the first step is going to be tightening this bolt and this bolt to 44 inch-pounds. My torque wrench only wants to go down to 60 inch-pounds, but it'll read out below 60, so it won't make the beeping noise, but I can just watch it and see when it gets to 44, and then I will stop. Keep in mind, 44 inch-pounds is like next to nothing. right there, 44. Okay. So these are both tight, and now we're gonna move on to the final torque pattern of 80 inch-pounds plus or minus 9 inch-pounds. All right, so this is the final torque on all these, or step B as the book calls it. You're gonna start the same spot, 1, 2, and then we're gonna move on from there. 80 inch-pounds plus or minus. All right, so we're gonna move on to the final torque for this bottom cover, sump cover, or step B as Seadoo calls it in the book. It's gonna be 80 inch-pounds plus or minus 9 inch-pounds. We're gonna start right here. This is number 1. Okay, and then we're gonna go here, that's number 2. And we're gonna go here, number 3, 4, 5, 6. That's pretty much it. I like to go over these again just to make sure. Gaskets do squish a little bit, they like to settle. And if you tighten the inner bolts first and do all the outer ones afterwards, the inner ones sometimes end up being a little loose. So I just do another go around. So here's the final go around. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the oil pumps. First one we're going to install is the oil suction pump. That's on this side. This consists of 2 stages of different pumps. Most of them you want to install with the markings outwards, but for this first one you're going to install with the markings inward. First thing we're going to do, lubricate everything in here and then start lubricating all the parts and put the parts in. Alright. So let's get our rings in, this outer ring in first. We're gonna oil everything up. You always want to make sure it's all lubricated. You don't want anything to start dry for the first time. Creates some nice scoring on things and premature wear and whatnot. You know, all the basic stuff I tell you. So, got this all lubricated. Now this one, dot down. Okay, that one's in, give it a little spin. That's all good. Okay, next piece is going to be this inner rotor. Same thing, lubricate it up. And this one, same thing, you're gonna install with the dot facing down. And then when you put this thing in here, just try and get it to line up so that it's right where the bolt hole is. I mean, not bolt hole, sorry, the hole for the shaft. All right, next step's gonna be new O-ring, lubricate it, and you're gonna install it insert it into the bore. Make sure it's seated on its flange surface, and then the next part is you're gonna want to get its pump cover plate, lubricate where the shaft rides and where the pump rides. And then it's gonna install just like that. And then you want to push it in, you want to hear like a click. Just like that. So you know you're seated and the gasket's installed. Okay. Next step's going to be installing the next set of rotors or oil pump. These ones you're going to make sure your dot is facing outward on both the inner and the outer. What I like to do first, I got the pin. Put the pin in the shaft. Just like that. Yep. Just like that, centered. Okay. And then you're going to lubricate this. Outer, inner surfaces, everything. And you are going to install it like so and let it engage onto the pin. Okay, there we go, that's engaged. Next step is going to be installing the outer pump ring Again, lubricate everything up, outside, inside, all the surfaces, just like so. And then install it with the dot facing outward. And you're gonna put this in here just like this. You're gonna line everything up and it should drop right in place, and that's in. And the final step for the oil pump is going to be installing the pump cover plate. Again, just lubricate the shaft and lubricate where the pump rides. Everything's all lubricated, just like that. And then we are going to install this, line up the pins, put that in place. Should be able to wiggle it and it should sit on those pins. And that's it. Obviously, give it a little check, make sure it still spins and all. It's a little lubricated. And now we're going to install the bolts. So here we got our bolts, 3 on this side. You're going to put them in, and these are going to be set to 80 inch-pounds plus or minus 9 inch-pounds. Got our torque wrench set. There's no bolt pattern for these. I just go very lightly in a circular pattern. Make sure everything's seated. Get them snugged up. Then the final step for this suction pump is installing the gear. You want to make sure that the black gear goes on the left side. You're going to insert the pin, get it centered, line this gear up on top, and then push it, and you should hear 2 clicks, or 1 click for both ears. And you want to just make sure, check the oil pump, make sure you have smooth operation. You don't want anything to be bound up or anything like that. So this one's good. All right, so next we're going to move on to the oil pressure pump, this side. Again, first thing you're going to want to do is lubricate everything. Okay. Go in there with your finger, just kind of smear it around. And then you're going to install your shaft, but your shaft has to be installed first. And you want to make sure, you can see that this is not symmetrical. From the end to this hole is a lot shorter than the end to this hole. The longer end goes in first. So we're going to drop that in there, just like that. Okay. And then we're going to insert our pin, which it's a lot easier if you just take it out. Put the pin in, center the pin. Make sure it doesn't rub, bind, make sure it's not worn out. With this seated in here, this pin should freely move back and forth, and it does. Okay. Next, we're going to install our inner rotor. These ones, you want the dot facing outward. So again, lubricate the whole thing, like so. So lubricated. And then you're going to drop this in right on top of that pin and make sure it seats. So you're going to spin it until it seats. All right, seated. Okay. Next part, outer rotor. Again, like a broken record, lubricate. I mean, this is like the most important part. If you put these things in dry and you start this up, there's a pretty good chance you're going to like score some shit up. All right, again. Dot facing outward. You're going to put this in like so. You're going to line everything up, and then it should just drop in place and spin. Then going to install our cover. Again, lubricate any of the surfaces, and then same thing here, this shaft, because that's where the pump spins on. And then we're going to install that. All right, now we're going to install this shaft, this pump cover plate. And you're going to put it on, line up the pins, and just drop it in place, like so. And then if you spin it, you wiggle it back and forth, it should seat on the pins. Okay, and now we're gonna install our bolts. Got our bolts, and we're gonna install them. No Loctite either. You can also tell that they kind of cheaped out on bolts because these are not stainless steel and they are mild steel, but I guess they figure that since they're going to be inside the motor, covered in oil, there's like zero chance of them rusting. They also look like they're galvanized, but I think overall, Seadoo just kind of picked the cheapest option possible to build these spark motors. They're also plasma line. They don't have sleeves, although some of the newer not Vortex, the Ace motors, the 1630 Ace motors, the 300 motors, and just some of the newer model ones that are the lower horsepower models are also sleeved, not sleeved, they're also plasma coated, which if they do get salt in them, they don't last very long. But if you do take care of them, I've seen them survive. Definitely not in high horsepower applications though. Stock, they're pretty good. All right, we got all the bolts in, and now we're gonna torque these 80 inch-pounds plus or minus 9 inch-pounds, crisscross pattern. Same thing, kind of just get them in a little bit at a time, and then once you have them all seated nice, go back and give them their final torque. Okay, so those are all seated, so now we're gonna go right to our All right, these are all torqued, and then our last step is going to install the gear. Again, same thing, we've got a pin. Gonna install the pin, get it centered, and then this gear is going to go on this side. And like I said, you don't want to switch the gears up or anything, because they are different tooth, I believe. This one's a little bit smaller than this one. Click, that's in. All right, so next up, our idlers. These are pretty straightforward. First thing you're going to want to do, lubricate surfaces that ride on each other. So we got this one, show you, and then we have this one. Okay, and then you're just gonna put this in. I like to take the bolt out before I do anything, spin it, and then you're gonna want to line it up with the bolt hole and the teeth, obviously. So that one's in. Put our bolt in, and then we're gonna torque this down to the infamous 80 plus or minus 9 inch-pounds. All right. That one's on. Let's torque it down. All right. Let's move on to the next one. Again, don't switch these up because you will cause some problems. This one is a little bit bigger than that one. This goes on this side. We're going to lubricate everything up. Get all the teeth engaged properly. Okay. That one faces upwards. Here's our bolt. Again, no Loctite. 80 plus or minus 9. Okay. And then the final gear we're going to install is the gear for the water pump that goes up to the water pump. Lubricate, set in place, lubricate, install. And this goes which way? Like this. Okay. And that is a wrap for the oiling system. Again, like I said, I don't think I said it on this one, but we spun this one to make sure it was free. This one you're going to spin over to make sure that all is free too. So that's pretty much it. Now that this is done, we're probably gonna move on to either the head or the side case, but we'll get there. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get this side cover on. We got a new gasket. That's Seadoo part number. Same bolts as that bottom plate. Like I had said, they're like self-tappers, so you're gonna wanna make sure that you get them back into the same thread holes so you don't create new threads again, and then eventually, if you gotta take this apart again, potentially strip it. So first thing we're gonna do, get this on. Here's our two-step torque sequence. You're gonna get 1, 2, 3 bolts tight, 44 inch-pounds, and then finally we're gonna do all of them. Same thing, 80 inch-pounds plus or minus 9. And there is your bolt pattern. So I'm gonna get all this set up. I'm gonna get all these bolts snugged up on here first, and then we'll go through the torque sequence. Again, these don't use any Loctite. We got our new gasket in place, and we're gonna get this on. This is a little bit of a tricky part. All right, now that we get everything snugged up and the gasket on, we're gonna do our first torque sequence, 44 inch-pounds. We're gonna go 1, 2, and then 3. That pretty much sums that all up, and then again, I just go over them once again just to make sure everything's snug, and that's a wrap.